All right, welcome to the March CALS Comm workshop. We are talking about how to identify a good story and tell it creatively. And we have two of our CALS Comm team presenters. Delynn Ford is a news and feature writer with CALS and editor of the CALS magazine. She's been with NC State for 14 years. She previously worked as editor of the university's faculty staff bulletin and as a science writer and media liaison with university communications. And then we also have Emma, Macek. God, I'm missing. We just even talked about this. People's names are important. Getting them right is important. Emma Macek.
Yeah, you're right.
Is a content specialist with CALS Communications. She joined CALS almost a year and a half ago and has bachelor's degrees in biology and journalism. She previously worked in communication roles at UNC School of Medicine and University of Wisconsin System. So thanks so much to Delynn and Emma for leading us today, and take it away.
Well, good morning, everyone. We're really glad to be here with you today, and we're looking forward to a good workshop. I wanted to especially say thank you to the folks who submitted questions in advance, because that helps us understand what you're wanting to know and how to structure this. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today based on your input. We're going to talk about three things: finding newsworthy stories, finding new ways to tell those stories or angles for those stories, and then how you might pitch a story to us at CALS Communications and what the options are for that. So what my bio didn't say is that before I started working for universities, I was a reporter at a daily newspaper and then for the Associated Press State Bureau. So when I was a reporter, I had to listen to a lot of story ideas and come up with my own and consider all the angles of those stories. And I had a framework for looking at them that served me pretty well. So I want to share that with you today. And if you would, I want you to role play a little bit. So you don't get to just sit there. You got to help us out here today. I want you to role play that you are a reporter today, and you will have a beat. So your beat might be your department. It might be a geographic part of the state. It might be a particular program area or a particular subject. So we're going to get you thinking about the stories on your beat and how you can get those out to a wider audience. Now, newsrooms have a couple of questions when you're thinking about a story. The first one is, who cares? And newsrooms are kind of snarky. I won't lie about that. But that question gets to a really important thing, which is, who should hear about this? Who's your audience? Because not every story is for every audience. The other question is, why does it matter? Why should I care about this? And that gets to, what's the impact of this story that you're talking about? How many people are going to be affected? How is it going to change their lives? How could it help them? How could it cost them money? How could it affect their children? So who cares and why does it matter are really good questions to think about when you're looking at story ideas. There are certain elements of stories that you're trained to look for as a reporter and editor. Still use these all the time. So this is kind of the classic definition of what news is. First of all, it has to be timely. There has to be some element of it that needs to be said now, or that's tied into a current event or a season or a topic that everyone's talking about at this point. Impact is what I was talking about with that last question. Think about a weather event or a banking crisis or other stories like that affect a lot of people, a large area, a lot of money. The impact of a story is how big is its reach. Of course, with news, conflict sells, right? So controversial topics or differences of opinion are often in the headlines. If you look at your favorite news source today, you're going to see this. And as a university, I think we have a unique role to play with those kinds of topics, because we can offer unbiased, we can offer scientific research-based information from experts. And so that's a good place to be for us. That's something unique that we bring to the table. Proximity could either be geographic proximity, or maybe it's affecting a group that you're part of that is national or international, but they all have something in common and they're affected by this. Okay, so those are kind of classic elements of newsworthiness, but there's more to it than that. We click on stories because they appeal to our senses and they appeal to our emotions. And if you've been following, the Oscar coverage this week, we like powerful people, famous people. If you were following the Murdoch murder trial, we are also fascinated by infamous people and by stories like that. Human beings are wired to seek out stories ever since we've been sitting around campfires to right now. So people are always looking to relate to other people by hearing their stories. And that's the best part of my job, is getting to share stories and getting to hear people's stories. When you see a person tell their story, it helps you to get a different point of view. And you take in that information in a little bit different way than you would just reading a set of bullet points with information. We really like to have a human being tell us a story. So for instance, I can think of a TV story we did one time. There was a change in how many bus routes would be available for people who rode the buses on wheelchairs. And so instead of saying the city council did this today, which is, true, but kind of boring, we found a person who rode those buses to work every day and follow that person and let them tell us what it would mean to have fewer routes for people in wheelchairs. So looking for a human angle or a person to help you tell that story is really effective. Obviously, visual appeal. I can write the most interesting story in the world, but unless I can get you to take a look at it, that doesn't matter. So the visuals to a story are tremendously appealing. And we need to think about those from the very beginning when we're developing story ideas. Video, of course, being able to share that is a huge advantage right now with social media reach. Of course, some of the things that you see in the headlines are just plain weird. You should never underestimate the power of strange stories. I'll give you an example. As a science writer, we were told if we ever had a story about chocolate or robots, we would have instant success. And unfortunately, that's mostly true. Howling cow ice cream is another nice part of that rule. So quirkiness is also something that's weird or that is unexpected, is how we generally remember information better. Okay. So if you're thinking about trying to get a story someplace else and enlisting somebody, maybe CALS Communications, maybe somebody else to help you out, it really helps to do your homework. So I'm asking you to do two things today: role play and also to do some homework. I know you didn't think the workshop would come with homework, but it does. I would like you to today, as you're going about your business and you're checking a news site for what's going on, think about why those stories are at the top of that page. Why are they in headlines? What elements that we've just been talking about of newsworthiness do they fit? And who's going to be interested in reading that story? How many people? Is it a small group? Is it a big group? Think about that, just as if you were the person, the editor, making the decisions about what's on that site. And if you're going to come to us or come to other people, do read over the site, look at the social media channels, check out their e-newsletter or their publications and see what's covered and what kinds of stories they're writing. Are they long? Are they short? Are they stories about people? Are they economic stories with lots of facts and figures? Do they only tell their stories by video? What is it that they're doing there? And that will give you a better idea of if you're a fit with what they're doing. And of course, the great thing now is that we can ask other people to help us amplify our stories, whether that's through social media, whether that's through cross-posting or reprinting something. All of those are options. And been doing that this week with the story, and other people who have an interest in that topic have been helping share that story out to different places. That's very helpful. Okay, so those are some things to keep in mind. And we wanted to pause a little bit just during the sections and to say, if you have questions about newsworthiness, go ahead and type them into the chat. We'll also leave some question time at the end if you have something that you want to ask. But Janine will be monitoring those. So if you have something that you want to ask, go ahead and type it in whenever you think of it. Okay. Emma's going to talk a little bit more specifically about CALS communications and what we're doing. And we really appreciate Sarah Lane came up with some specific questions about working with CALS communications. So we're going to try to answer as many of those as we can, Sarah. Thank you.
Dylan, can I ask a quick question before Emma
Sure.
starts her section? So like there's always to me the like other outside ethical question of maybe it doesn't easily fit into one of these pots of timeliness or suited for the time or whatever else is happening. But like, how do you weigh the importance of a topic that's important to your organization or your in some cases like paper or outlet against some of those other criteria?
Well, there's a way, and Emma's going to give some specific examples of this where you have an idea, but that's where we get into trying to find a tie-in to one of those other elements. Usually if you dig a little bit deeper, or if you think about different ways to tell the story, you can find a way to make it of interest. So I think it's a matter of not only, hey, that's a great idea. That's not usually how it works. Usually you think, we should be talking about this. How could we make this interesting to more people? Or how could we share it in a compelling way? What's the best way to tell that story? So it's a process of thinking through it. You really do have to have some of those elements. The human interest part makes feature stories something that we can do at most points, but the best stories have some sort of tie-in to a larger discussion or to something timely. So I think that gets into finding the angle for your story and thinking through the best way to tell it. Does that help?
And I can add to that, we always have these types of discussions within our team, and we're happy to have those types of discussions with you too, to kind of help find those angles as well, because it's not always apparent right away, but there's always a way, like Dylan said. So just to provide some information about some background information about CALS communications and kind of how we approach our stories. So first, I think it's important to explain a little bit more about the audiences that we have, and we put them into two different categories. So we have our internal news or internally focused news, and then our externally focused news. And our internal audience includes people like faculty, staff, extension directors, and agents. And those types of stories are usually focused on those audience members as well. So it can include topics like retirements, or we can dive into feature stories or different awards and honors. And those stories are mostly shared via our Inside CALS, which Janine runs and sends Tuesday mornings. That's the Tuesday morning internal newsletter that you might receive. And then our intranet as well. And then we'll talk about how those kind of intersect too, but then we have our external audience, and we break the external audience even up into two further categories. And we have our primary audience and our secondary audience. So our primary audience is considered our larger priority, but those include prospective students and faculty, alumni, industry members, and then communities across the state of North Carolina and beyond. And then our secondary audience, which again is still super important to us, but those are people like our current students, current donors or partners or other supporters, the parents of those students and prospective students, and our stakeholders. So these can vary, and but this is just a good general idea of kind of who we're trying to target in our written communications. And some of those stories can include stories about faculty features. Again, so here's kind of where it intersects faculty and staff features with the internal too, but students, alumni, different supporters, whether that's through monetary gifts or time gifts, and then outreach and community impact stories. So what are we doing to help people and how are we using what we know to help people. Current topics and trends. So the idea behind this one is that we are talking with our experts to help explain the science behind something that is trending in the industry. So for example, Dylan wrote a recent story about bee vaccines, which has been a discussion in the industry. And we were able to talk with David Tarpey about that. So that was cool, and it did really, really well because people are interested in learning about it. So we kind of monitor our channels to kind of see what people are talking about and how we can offer advice and kind of position ourselves as leaders as well in that area. And then we'll talk a lot about this more later, but our research stories as well. So we'll sometimes focus more on faculty or staff members, their stories, but instead sometimes we'll focus sometimes on the research itself too, and what's new and what they're kind of working on. And then those stories are shared on our CALS website, so the external site, in our news section, or our CALS Weekly, which is our Thursday newsletter. That's technically our external newsletter. And then our social media channels as well. So there's some caveats, for all these different ways of where we're sharing, but these are the general ideas of what we follow. Any questions about those so far? I'll just wait a second. Okay, feel free to add them and we can touch on them later too. But so now that we know about the audience, we can talk about, go a little bit deeper into CALS news and the types of news stories that we cover and how we choose to cover them. So all the story ideas that we receive are vetted among the CALS content team. So that's Dylan and I and a few other team members. And we meet every week to discuss the story ideas that we've received, which ones we think we can fit in, which ones we want to pursue, and kind of angles going forward and how to best approach the stories. And we consider a lot of different topics in this area, but again, generally, we want to make sure that there is a wide appeal to the audiences that we discussed recently, so not too specific, and overall, yeah, that broad view. And a general rule too, we consider awards, honors, and grants on a case-by-case basis, and we'll go much further into that as well and why we have to choose to do that. But we also, another consideration is that we do our best to spread the love among departments and programs. So we do actively monitor and review our content to make sure that we're trying to feature everyone. Of course, we can't feature everyone. CALS and Extension is massive, but we do try our best. So we'll actively see, maybe we haven't had a story in a specific area, we'll try and pursue stories there in that area, just so we can make sure that we're keeping we're talking about everything and everyone, that's a part of CALS and Extension too. So that kind of leads into, again, the choices that we have to make. So we receive different priorities, or maybe we already have committed to certain stories and we're trying to fill gaps, but our day-to-day in the stories we work on, it's always in flux. So every day, even something can change or something can come in. So we have to consider that, and then the availability within our team as well. So we have a few writers within our team. We also work with freelancers too. So kind of delegating the tasks and seeing what we have time for. And that kind of leads again into the timeline. So each story kind of some have quicker turnarounds, others have longer goals or something. So stories can take different times, but we also plan out our content, or try to plan out our content even months out in advance too. So the better we can plan for something, the better we think the story, can be too. And there's obviously some quick turnaround sometimes, and it is what it is, but we do try and plan our content out. So that being said, even if we can't commit to a full written story, we are always happy to talk about other options as well. So for example, social media, and I think our new social media specialist, Kara, was on today. So they joined our team recently. So we can talk about ideas for sharing on social. We can talk about the newsletters that we mentioned before. So our internal and external newsletters. For example, we restructured our external newsletter with a weekly at a glance section you might have seen at the top. So that's a quicker way for us to, an easy way for us to share some of the news that we can't write full stories about. And then we'll consider a lot of different areas when choosing the best fit for something, but visual components, again, are considered pretty heavily for our social channels. And overall, this is kind of a faster way to share news. And again, it depends on what the topic is as well for our choices. So we can also, even if a story isn't a good fit for our social or our newsletters, we can think of other places as well for the story. So maybe there's a specialty publication that we think the story would be a really great fit for, or maybe there's a university-wide appeal that we can work with university communications folks on that, or there's a lot of different other ways too, but we want to emphasize that we want to help and can help make sure that your content or help your content reach the intended audience, even if it's not specifically with us working on it as well. So we did have a question about video come in too. So Dylan and I are not the video experts, but we do have two videographers on our team, Chris and Keishan, and they've done some previous workshops as well that should be recorded and placed somewhere. But in general, we follow the rule of that video helps showcase emotion, action, or process. So if you think that something might follow either like an emotional appeal or the video, it's easier, sometimes more impactful to see someone, with emotion versus writing about it, or action or process. We're always happy to talk through ideas, and I can always put you in contact, or we can put you in contact with Chris and Keishan as well, and they're happy to discuss ideas.
So we get a lot of questions about events, and that brings us to some things. There's things that we can do well, and there's things that are not as good a fit. Events in general, just because we have so many, I don't have any idea, Janine might know, but we have hundreds and thousands of events probably every year between CALS events, student events, campus events, extension events across the state. So just because there are so many, it would be impossible for us to cover them all. In general, if we're going to look at events, they're a great place to get story ideas, but usually not a story themselves. And if you go, I can give you a couple of examples of how that might work. Let's say there's a blueberry field day down at Castle Hayne, which happens. One of my former colleagues went to Castle Hayne during that field day, and this expert was very busy showing people around and doing all the things that you do at a field day, but she saw mechanical shakers that are used to harvest blueberries. And so she did a follow-up story with him, and I believe we did a video to go with that because we had a little bit of time to think about the story, but because she was there on site, it was a way to think, oh, well, that'd be a great story, and maybe we should tell it this way. I can give you another example of an event that turned into a story. I was invited by Martha Mobley to go to a horse field day in Franklin County, and she has that every year, and it's a good event. She really doesn't need my help getting people there. There were, wall-to-wall cars along these rural roads where we were going to horse farms. But Martha was really smart. She talked to me about the economics of horses in North Carolina and how big a business that is. So I went on the field day, I took some pictures, and I got some color or some quotes from people there. And we did a story about the economic impact of horses in North Carolina and how that's growing in places like her county. She also had a good relationship with Morning Ag Clips, and she had told them that we would have a story coming. And so they picked it up from us and featured it. So that was a way to use that event, but not talk directly about the event. One exception to our rule is we recently did a story about an event. It's a TEDx talk featuring young people that just happened. It's called Amplifying Young Voices. And we did that for a couple of reasons. This is a one-time event. It's with young people, so we want to highlight that. And Maru Gonzalez, who is working on this kind of work all the time. This is part of her her efforts And we wanted to highlight her work. We wanted to highlight the kids. We wanted to tie in with the TEDx events, which are very well known nationally, obviously. So we did do a story about the TEDx talk, but it won't be happening again next year. We won't be doing it every year. And there was a lot of, we did receive some direction to, yeah, we need to call this out. We need to make people aware of this. So like you guys, sometimes we get pressure from bosses or from other people to talk about a certain topic or to cover an event. And so what we do at that point is try to figure out the best way to achieve that we can, the best angle, the best way of approaching it. And if we have to do it quickly, what can we do quickly? So that might be social media or other things. So that's some examples. You can take an event and make it into a story later, which might help you because it might be a better story, more interesting. And you might be able to put together some visuals or make a better proposal to us or to other people about that story.
And then another area that, again, we don't cover necessarily in the expected way, but we do like sometimes to think about a different creative way to share is awards and grants. So CALS and Extension is filled with award winners, which is so exciting. But we do consider honors, awards, and grants on a case-by-case basis with a focus on those that are extremely prestigious, nationally recognized, or of high value. So some examples would be maybe a really massive grant, or maybe a faculty member was inducted into the National Academy of Sciences, or the Inventors Hall of Fame, or AAAS, which happens. So we will cover those higher level awards, but usually instead we like to focus on the person and their impact instead, because truthfully we think that's more interesting than a quick paragraph about the award and what they won. So again, there might be some exceptions to this. So you might find on the departmental or program level that it is important for you to write those types of stories, or you've received a request, to do so. But based on what we've talked about before, there's different angles kind of that you can think about with it. And if you do write a story, you can always share it with us for inclusion in our newsletters or on our social media channels. So we can think of a way to do that, or maybe another group writes the release instead. You can always share that with us instead, and we can figure out if we can find a place to share it instead. So some examples of how we cover events. So we wrote this story, I think it was a few years ago, about a award a faculty member won, but instead of just explaining that the faculty member won this award and what it was for, or a little bit even about just the plan itself, we also featured more about the faculty member's research and his story and why he does what he does and what he's hoping to do still. So we talk about his childhood and where he got his passion for plants. Then of course we still mentioned too, he won this award, and that's where the story idea kind of came from. But we also had some really great visuals throughout the story that made it a lot more interesting than, again, just reading a quick story about an award. So I'll just kind of go through here a little bit, but it helps the reader kind of put the reader into a place of better understanding the story and what the award truly means, just because you're able to explain more about the person who received it as well. So yeah, the red bud, the flamethrower, some of you might have heard of it, but and then another example is with Brian Blinson. So he was a 2022 CALS Distinguished Alum. So a very, very big honor. But again, we were more interested in sharing more about him instead of just the award. So we had some photos, and it's always great to get some NC State gear, in the photos too. But we were able to share details about how he got into raising cattle. So we found out that he took out a small loan when he was only 6 years old to get his first cow. And now he's the director of the Cattlemen's Association too. So we were able to kind of go through his whole story. Here's his family. Here's what he loved about being at NC State. And then we actually didn't even mention the award until the last paragraph. So again, you understand who he is, and you can better understand why the award means so much too, if you know more about the person behind it and then kind of the work that went behind the award as well. And as Dylan mentioned before too, a story like this has a very strong human interest angle, which always does well, at least from what we've seen so far too.
So Emma's been talking a little bit about showing the story behind the award and showing that person's and honoring that person's lifetime of work. And so we try to think about that with research as well. And so sometimes we get stories about a grant. And what I try to explain to people is, yes, we're very excited that you got your grant, but what we're even more excited about is getting the story that comes as a result of that later, once you've done the work and you've made some discoveries and you've worked with partners across the state. We want to talk about what happened because you got that grant, not that you got that grant. We can mention it, and that's good. But in general, there are so many grants, again, at NC State. That's a lot of what we do as a leading research institution, that we need to talk about impact, so that why does it matter question comes in here. So unless the grant is double-digit millions, 10 million or more, with a few exceptions, that's kind of the university bar for writing something about the grant itself. But we write many, many stories about the impact of grant-funded research. So we have to find a way, when we're talking about research, it is something that we have that's unique, that we want to share with people. We have to find a way to tell it in a compelling way for a lay audience, so that I can make you care about it in a sentence or two, and you can understand why it's important. We want to make sure that people understand too, that we're focused on things that affect people's everyday lives. So if it affects people in a large way, we want to weigh in with, here's what NC State is doing about this problem. Here's how we're looking into it and trying to make things better. There can also be seasonal tie-ins to particular research. We've got some examples below that we were able to use that with. People tend to pay attention to things that are of the season, and that's one more way to get folks to click on a story, so we're aware of those tie-ins as well. Sometimes it's the story behind the research of, how do scientists find out that this is true? What does it look like? It's not, that might be interesting in some cases and not in others. If you're doing wildlife research, it might be fun to talk about what it's like to go out into the field and do that. But if it's pipetting in a lab, we've probably seen that before, and that's not too interesting unless you're in that particular discipline. We have we have 3 stories that are done in an interesting way. And Sam Jones does a lot of the research writing for us, and she does an excellent job. So she finds those details that are very strange. So the quirkiness, but also she makes a strong tie into, why should we care about this tiny little insect that spreads a really serious virus that's a problem across the state and across the country, by the way. So spitting insects, that's one of the angles that she found. But she also does a good job of explaining tomato spotted wilt virus and what it does and how it affects people. So she found a way through that story that's really compelling. And I like her storytelling ability. And of course, we got these really good microscopic images that make you go, ooh, what is that? Is it harmful? What does it do? To help lead through the story. And this research has been going on for quite a long time. So we can talk about the trajectory of that person's career, what they're doing in their lab, what the next steps are, and how that matters. And all of that helps make this a really strong story. Okay. Zombie deer. Emma, this was a Halloween story, correct?
Yeah, also from Sam. So the whole ideas of zombies and the spooky picture too.
Yeah, you thought you had it bad with fictional zombies. We actually have real zombies. So
Or
she,
zombies, but
yeah, zombie deer. So I had no idea, but that image, with your infrared look to it, the theme, the Halloween timing, and some of the scariest uh, things that you have to worry about are actually insects. Also, they do great things, but mosquitoes, for example, not great. So this explains what's going on and why all of this is tied together. And she does a great job of explaining that. There's also, as you can see at the bottom, there are podcasts, there are other kinds of stories and other ways of telling that. So she did a good job of exploring what the options were.
And this podcast was a collaboration too with University Communications, right? Dylan, this is their their podcast too. So we were able to kind of share the idea and then kind of tie it too with them.
Yeah, the university has a research blog called The Abstract, like for a research paper abstract, and they do a podcast that goes along with that. And we work hand in hand with them to cover research. They will often do short pieces about research that's been published in a major journal. Let's say it's been in Science or in Nature or Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Those are big journals. So they'll take those and they write sort of I think of it as like a movie trailer. They write just a little clip about this research. And then they reach out to science writers nationally and internationally and try to get them to do stories and coverage about that. And so there are other stories that would be more suitable for us that might work for specialty publications or that we take time to do a feature like these that we've been showing you. So we just cooperate with them and collaborate with them and figure out who can tell the story and what might be the best way to tell it. The last story is seasonal again, but this also gets to the process of research. And oh my gosh, poinsettias are seasonal and they're beautiful and they're interesting. There's history to them, the science of how they work and how they change color. And here we are growing them without soil, which is interesting too. But to think about this researcher, starting in July to get ready for Christmas, it tells you something about his work, and it also tells you something about the market for that and the industry and how they work. Because we work a lot with major greenhouses here and with growers, and we supply information that helps them. So what he's learning is also helping other businesses and other people stay in business. And beautiful, beautiful images, of course, which never hurts. So with research, feel free to talk with us and we can chat through this. Not every story can be written about in a really accessible, cool way, but we will choose selectively research that we think we can really do a good job with, and we'll collaborate with other people to get as wide a reach for that as we can.
Do we have any questions so far before we dive into a little bit more about creatively sharing your story? I guess I could look too, but.
So far, so good.
Okay. All right. So now you've got your story idea and you know about your audience. The next step would be to kind of think about how different creative angles that you can take and how to creatively share your story. So as we talked about before, you have to make sure that you're explaining why someone should care and why it affects them. So some examples of some stories that we've gone beyond just the general news story with are, for example, our spokesbirds, Chocolate and Chip, which were the national Thanksgiving turkeys this past year. Which we were very excited about. So we still had a general news story with information that we needed to share about the honor and what was happening. So we wanted to share that NC State was selected as a home for these national Thanksgiving turkeys. We wanted to share that the birds were from a farm in North Carolina. We wanted to share some plans for the event and why it matters so much that we were chosen. So we had all of that within our story, and it was a collaboration between a lot of different groups, but we also had this, some may say silly, photo story with like a photo story from the point of view of chocolate, so one of the turkeys. So we knew that we had all these great visuals. We knew that we basically had photos from every step of the way of these turkeys going from the farm in North Carolina all the way to Washington, D.C. So, they're in the car, they're on the red carpet, they're on the in this fancy, the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C. So we knew we had these great visuals, and we were able to include a video, but we wanted to take it a little bit further and really take the reader through the process of what this has looked like on their way to DC. So we Alice, one of our team members, wrote the story from the point of view of chocolate with some silly references, but we were still able to link back, to our original story so people could get information they needed. But this was just a different way of creatively sharing the exciting news versus just the general news story. Another example was, I think last spring, NC State became the first university to have all 7 major dairy breeds on campus. So again, very exciting. And we wanted to have a general news story still with information about the herd and what it means for the NC State community and really beyond in North Carolina, and how it came to be, because it was a years-long process of acquiring these different breeds, which was really important to the herd manager, Devin Pendry, too. But we again took it a step further and created this interactive guide and so folks could learn about each breed. And we created this with an instructional designer, and I'll just give a quick preview if you haven't seen it. But we kind of angled it as it was around graduation time, so we said, more like a yearbook with the graduation. So again, silly, but we still receive requests. I'll stop for a second, but
2022. With the new addition this year, our herd boasts 7 different and stunning breeds of dairy cows.
And then you can click on each each cow and learn some quick details about them. So again, it was just a fun way to kind of share some information, and we still receive external requests that they can use the guide and credit us and everything. And it's actually being used too in the Dairy Education Center. So it was a way that helpful content that is serving our audience, but also is helpful content for others to learn more about the breeds as well. And then the final example for this is this past holiday season, the PSI and CPSI had their first holiday tree in the Plant Sciences building. So instead of just giving information, I'll pull it up, but instead of just giving information about the tree being there or a quick social post or something, we talked with a Christmas tree researcher from Extension about Christmas tree research and how he's been working with this farmer to create this awesome tree using genetics. And I talked with the farmer and talked kind of about the idea behind how hard they've worked to grow this tree and how they were selected, and also talked with the person who organized the event. So she was able to help me with some pictures. It's Alex from PSI, but it was just a different way of really showing a whole story behind this tree and why it's such a big deal, because it does represent North Carolina Christmas trees in general too, and it's very carefully selected. So, and then we were also able to include some ornaments. The ornaments for the tree were created by PSI members and affiliates. So we were able to share some labware ornaments and ornaments created from North Carolina materials too. So for example, here's one of them, or some labware. So that was fun too. What?
That's a petri dish, I think.
Yeah, Rhino Lab and wood, and yeah. So it was very cool to be a part of that and to kind of showcase. And it's a monumental event too with the first holiday tree. I'm sure they'll continue having them every year now too. So.
And even though there's some lighthearted things there, you'll also see that tucked into the story, there's information about the industry, both in terms of poultry and turkeys, and then in terms of Christmas trees too. So lighthearted approach maybe, or fun approach, but there's still serious information in there too.
And then going off of topics, if you come up with a good story idea, now that you have all the tools that you need, it can potentially live on forever and kind of be part of a cycle that you share every year and that we share every year. So some of the topics that we are always looking for ideas for our graduation. So the 2 times a year with both the December and May graduation, we really love to feature both graduate and undergraduate students and what they loved about NC State, their experience at NC State, and kind of their goals for the future, what they're going to be doing now. We also like to feature stories, just like research stories, but stories related to holidays. So every year we'll do or try to do kind of a CALS love story. So a couple that met at NC State or fell in love at NC State, or stories about like the flower industry or how to keep flowers last, or how to make cut flowers last for longer, or trends in the industry. So things like that. Or we've talked about some of the Christmas stories that we like to do. So Christmas trees, poinsettias, holiday meals, anything like that. Halloween, as we talked about too with Sam, zombie stories, but we've also done stories on pumpkins or apples or spiders. So anything like that. We love to do those, or other things, stories about summer experiences. So a lot of students are doing really awesome things over the summer while they're off of classes. So internships, study abroad, anything like that. And we'll feature those over the summer, but also as a part of the back to school content as well. So we call those the CALS, I think it's CALS Summer Stories is the name of the series that we've done. So I was looking for those ideas too. We're in the midst of our Women's History Month coverage. So we're featuring awesome women in CALS and Extension. So I think we have at least 3 new stories so far and more are coming. And we just wrapped up coverage of Black History Month, and we're kind of doing an intersection for some of the stories between Women's History Month and Black History Month. But we also are hoping to continue featuring stories as part of other celebrations. So anyone we can feature for the Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, Native American Heritage Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, LGBTQ+ Pride Month. So we always love to feature folks, who fit into these groups, but we also love to put a special emphasis on them during the time period as well. So any of these who, if you ever have any ideas about any of these topics, please feel free to send them our way. We're happy to look into writing a story about them, or we can also work with you on writing the story in a way to help share the story as well with our channels.
Who writes what? And this was a question we had also, and the answer really is it depends. It depends on what the appeal of the story is. It depends on who has time and what the intended audience might be and how broad the appeal is. So if you have a question about that, talk with us. I think that's the best advice. And we're going to share a link also to our story submission form in just a little bit, but let's talk it out. You can send us a quick email. We can get in touch and talk that over with you. We also, as we alluded to earlier, we collaborate with other folks. So we're always asking other people if they would be willing to pick up our content. And we have an easy way to share that with them most of the time through Newswire. So for example, I wrote a profile of a woman who was the first African-American woman to earn a PhD from NC State. Back in 1973, she earned a plant pathology doctorate. And so after we did that story, of course, we wanted to share that, but the grad school shared it. It's going to be in the bulletin today. I haven't gotten my copy yet, but it's going to be in that. The Alumni Association might share it. It's going out on social media as we speak. The libraries, which had done a post about her that prompted me to get in touch with her and find where she was now. All those people had an interest in the story, and we're proud of her. So for Women's History and Black History months, it was also a good tie into those things. So that's an example of how, no matter who does the story, we might pick up a story from somebody else about one of our people, we share it out with those groups as well. If there is no writer, either with the department or your group or with us who can write about something, you can also get your faculty involved. And there are a couple of different outlets that they can write for, probably more than a couple. Many specialty publications will take things written by experts in their field, so they can explore that. We also work with The Conversation, which contains articles written by academic experts on timely issues. And so let's say I talked to Clyde Sorensen last week in entomology and plant pathology. He wrote a beautiful piece for The Conversation with video about fireflies. And so that went everywhere. Another insect example, Matt Bertone wrote a story about why you shouldn't squish the spider that's living in your house. And it got millions and millions of hits being distributed through The Conversation. We also have an outlet called Futurity that shares university written stories across the country to media outlets as well. So you can do work with faculty to get them writing as well. And that's another option for you. Okay, so here's the promised link for our story submission form. You can go in there and we will receive that. It's got details, so if you feel like you've got it in good enough shape, that you think you know what the story is, go ahead and send it to us, and that way we make sure we have it and we have a record of it, and we won't lose track of that in a busy inbox for our email. So that's an advantage of losing the form. If you need a little bit of discussion before you're ready to share the story, or you just have some questions about it, you can get in touch with us and we will talk through it with you. Okay.
Dylan, we had a question come in from Sarah about stats on average read rates for stories and the newsletter, weekly newsletter. Sarah, are you asking, I guess, like, in terms of our reach, I think the internal goes around to 5,000 people and the external is at 6,500, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know, as far as like stories on the website, like how many hits those stories typically get?
Yeah, I can provide some information about that. So usually at least for page views for just the news section of our website, we usually like to be at least around 20,000 page views a month. So again, that depends on how many stories we do in a month, how long the month is. For example, we've been without a social media specialist for a while, so we're excited to have Caro, but we haven't been able to probably as strategically post our stories on social. So things like that all play a role, but so it depends on the story. Some have upwards of like close to 1,000 page views each, or even upwards from that. And some only get 150, unfortunately, or something. So it varies a lot, but we are starting to better learn which stories resonate better with our audience too. But it's also worth a trial and error sometimes, I think, too. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does vary, but we try to do everything we can to find ways to make our stories either endure as evergreen stories or get them out through other folks as well.
And then there's another question about timeline. What is a typical timeline for acceptance, rejection of a pitch? And are people notified if a story is rejected?
We meet every Monday to talk about story ideas for the weekly newsletters that we do, both internal and external. So we can let you know something after that. You're generally going to hear back from us if we're interested in doing it, because we might have more questions about who to get in touch with or other details, whether you have images to go with the story, whether there's something else that we wanted to clarify. It's not as formal as something like the magazine, which I also deal with. So with news, we're dealing with things, we make plans for regular, predictable things like graduation, Women's History Month, all of those timelines. And then we're also looking at things that pop up today and, that popped up yesterday that we have to balance the coverage of. So it's not consistent. There are things that change our plan every week. For something like the magazine, we're planning a year ahead often because we're thinking about seasons and getting photos and working with people off-site. So that takes a long time. But I think just put the ideas in, and we will, once we have an idea too, if it's not a good fit for right then, we usually keep it in the back of our minds or on our story list for consideration in the future. And if we don't think it's a good idea, or we think we need to have a different angle, we're happy to talk to you about that, about what would make it more appealing, or what could we do to make it a better pitch. Does that help?
Yeah, I'm Ashley Burns. I'm from the Agricultural Institute. That does help. I do have a follow-up question, if that's okay.
Sure.
So yeah, I think so. I'm in the Agricultural Institute. I teach writing, but I also put together our alumni newsletter, and help out with some of the stuff on social media and all of that as well. So I think our challenge has always been the CALS resources, the CALS publications have a bigger reach than our sort of little alumni newsletter. And so, but there are stories that we definitely want to be told. And I think we're struggling a little bit with, we would prefer our stories to have sort of broader reach, but they're stories that we want told anyway. So if they're not going to get written sort of at the CALS level, we want to do them as well. And so I think figuring out how to navigate that. And also you had mentioned a couple of times that sort of CALS can share things that other units produce as well. And is there a separate process for that? So I guess that's two questions. The first isn't particularly well formed, but the second is, what's the process for sharing things that we produce?
Okay. On the story ideas about maybe AGI students or faculty or staff that you want to talk about doing stories about, come up with a list with some ideas, and let's talk through that and see if there's a way that we can figure out, hey, you'll write some things, we'll write some things, and this is how we'll share information. An easy way that we have of sharing our content is Newswire, which is an electronic system for sharing between colleges and units on campus. So when the provost's office writes an item about a faculty member in honor or the dean search, we can grab that and pull it over to the CALS website, and vice versa. Other people can pick up our stories. For example, the profile story I wrote, the bulletin for the university can pick that up and just share it through their outlet. So that's what I'm talking about. And I don't know that.
I don't think AGI is on there. On Newswire, I think it's the larger groups, but you can always just send them to us, to the ideas. So again, at the our weekly at a glance section is a great place for like awards or other kind of timely information. But I know that Crystal worked with you too?
Yeah. No, okay. Not with me. I don't think I've met, but
I know she was she was the one who got some student ideas. I don't know who she was talking with, but we have featured AGI students, and the stories did very well, and we'd love to feature more. So let's definitely be in touch, and we can figure out the best way to share.
Okay, yeah. I mean, if we could, set up, because we actually have a running list of story ideas for sort of our newsletter and things like that. And so if we could share that with you and sort of divide it up and decide what's good for you guys and what maybe we could cover. So if we could do something a little more formal like that, I think that would help on our end a great deal.
Sure. Yeah, maybe we should set up a time and we can kind of go through everything and figure out the best process.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
And I think that's a great idea too, of keeping a running list of story ideas. We do that. We have spreadsheets, we have lists, we have things that we've saved to think about for the future. More formally, if you have something like that, it's called an editorial calendar, and it might include those seasonal stories or things that you're hoping to feature at different times. So yeah, make a list and think about timing for those as well, and create your own editorial calendar. It's something that social media is really good about, is scheduling posts and thinking ahead and reusing or repurposing things that you might have that might be timely again to make sure people have seen it.
Great, thank you. Okay, should I contact Crystal then?
Or you can contact us too. I just know like Crystal has worked with some people in your office. That's the only reason why I mentioned Crystal, but we can.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
I'll be glad to.
We have Crystal on the line. I think she
Oh.
unmuted herself.
I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So yeah, I've written a couple of stories for AGI, and I'm happy to talk further about some other ideas that you guys have. So if you guys at the meeting, just let me know and I can be there. Help out.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks, Crystal. Sorry, I didn't know you were on.
And before people jump off it, since we've reached the end of our hour, I would love people to stay on and keep talking though. Thanks so much to Dylan and Emma for covering this topic. And there are a lot of questions that still people are welcome to stay on and ask. Our next CALS-COMM workshop will be on April 20th, and it's a creative writing workshop. So there will be prompts and discussion about how to use creative writing tactics and techniques to bolster what you write professionally for your work life.
And do we share the slides with folks, Janine? Is it posted? Do we share?
Yes, so the video will be on YouTube, and then I will send out a email to everyone who registered with the slides and the link to the YouTube. Another question came in. I wonder if we could have a future workshop on creating an editorial calendar and ways and resources or even programs on how to make those. That's a great idea.
I think we could do that from a couple of perspectives. So yeah, we'll put that on our list of story ideas for workshops.
Dylan, Emma, any final words before we sign off?
Just thank you for joining us today.
That's what I was going to say too. Thank you.